The morning Nadine Okafor walked into the Hargrove and Pelletier law firm for her 9 o'clock appointment, the receptionist looked up, looked back down, and picked up her phone. She didn't say hello. She didn't say have a seat. She just picked up her phone and started scrolling, like Nadine wasn't standing there in a wool coat that cost more than the receptionist's monthly rent. Nadine stood at the front desk for 2 full minutes. She counted. She always counted, because she'd learned a long time ago that the details matter. The details are everything. She cleared her throat. The receptionist, a young woman with a name tag that said Brianna, glanced up with the kind of expression that said she was doing Nadine a favor just by making eye contact. "Can I help you?" "I have an appointment," Nadine said. 9 o'clock, with Mr. Pelletier. Brianna typed something, looked at the screen, typed something else. "What's the name?" "Okafor. Nadine Okafor." Another pause, a longer one than necessary. "You're here about the estate matter?" "That's right." Brianna looked at her again, just briefly. Just long enough for Nadine to catch exactly what she was thinking. The same thing people always thought when they looked at her. 61 years old, dark skin, silver locks pinned back under a burgundy head wrap. A woman who took the bus, they assumed. A woman whose estate matters involved a modest savings account and maybe a life insurance policy from a job she'd retired from. "Have a seat," Brianna said. "Someone will be with you." "Not Mr. Pelletier will be with you." "Someone?" Nadine sat down. She crossed her ankles, set her leather portfolio on her lap, and waited. She'd gotten very good at waiting. 61 years of practice will do that. If you've ever watched someone underestimate a person and then had to sit quietly while it happened, if you've ever been that person, then you already know how this story ends. But stay with me, because it's the middle part that matters. It's always the middle part. This is the story of Nadine Okafor, and the morning everything changed. Nadine grew up in Scarborough, Ontario, the third of 5 children, born to Comfort and Desmond Okafor, who had come to Canada from Ghana in 1971 with 2 suitcases and the kind of stubbornness that doesn't have a word for it in English. Her father drove a taxi for 12 years, then bought the taxi, then bought 2 more. Her mother cleaned offices downtown until Nadine was old enough to understand what that meant. And then her mother stopped because Desmond had done what he set out to do, and Comfort had earned a rest. Nadine watched all of it. She watched her father negotiate with men who didn't want to negotiate with him. She watched him keep records, meticulous, handwritten records, of every fare, every kilometer, every repair, every dollar that came in and went out. She watched him sit across from a bank manager at the Royal Bank on Danforth, who told him the loan he was applying for was quite a significant ask. And she watched her father place a folder on that man's desk without a word, open it, and let the numbers speak for themselves. The loan was approved. Nadine never forgot that folder. She never forgot what her father had taught her without ever sitting her down and saying, "Let me teach you something. That in this country, you come prepared. You come with receipts. You come with proof of everything, because the world will make you prove things that other people never have to prove, and the only answer to that is to have it ready before they ask." She studied accounting at Ryerson. U of T Ryerson now. She still corrected herself. Graduated in 1986, went to work at a small firm in Etobicoke, and spent the next 3 decades becoming very, very good at seeing what other people missed. She moved through firms, built a reputation, took on her own clients. She never opened her own practice. She'd thought about it, many times. But she liked the work itself more than she liked the idea of running an office, and that was fine. That was honest. What she did on the side, quietly, for 30 years, was invest. Not in any spectacular way. Not in a way that would have made anyone look twice. She was careful about that. Careful the way her father had been careful. The way anyone who understands that a single misstep can cost you twice what it cost someone else learns to be careful. She bought property when the market made sense. She sold when it didn't. She diversified. She compounded. She lived simply, drove a car that was 10 years old, kept her condo in Scarborough, the same one she'd bought in 1994, and she let time do what time does when you understand how it works. By the time Nadine Okafor walked into Hargrove and Pelletier that Tuesday morning, She was worth just over $4.2 million. Nobody looked at her and thought that. Nobody ever did. The appointment was about her late sister. Ya Okafor had died in March, 6 weeks before her 58th birthday, in the house she'd owned outright in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia. Ya had never married. She had no children. She'd worked as a registered nurse for 29 years and had spent her weekends gardening and arguing about hockey on the internet. She was the funniest person Nadine had ever known, and the house she left behind was full of her. Plants on every windowsill, stacks of novels on every flat surface, a kitchen that smelled like she'd just stepped out. Ya had left a will. A simple one, drafted by a local solicitor. The house and her registered accounts to Nadine. The contents of the house split among 3 friends. A small bequest to a nursing scholarship fund at Dalhousie. Clean, clear, straightforward. Except that somehow, in the 6 weeks since Ya's death, a man named Fletcher Drummond had filed a claim against the estate. Fletcher Drummond was a real estate investor out of Halifax. He had, according to the documents his lawyers had filed, a signed purchase agreement with Ya Okafor for the property, dated 14 months earlier. He claimed she had agreed to sell him the house for $420,000, roughly $80,000 below current market value, and that the estate was now obligated to complete the sale. The document existed. Nadine had seen it. Her name was not on it. Her sister's name was on it, in what looked very much like Ya's handwriting. Except that Nadine had spoken to her sister every week for 29 years, and Ya had never once mentioned selling the house, had never mentioned Fletcher Drummond, had in fact been putting money into a bathroom renovation 4 months before she died. You don't renovate a bathroom you're about to sell. Hargrove and Pelletier was the firm handling the estate. Nadine had called them herself, 2 weeks after the funeral, after the Drummond claim landed. She'd asked to speak with whoever was managing the file. She'd been told that would be Mr. Pelletier himself. She'd made an appointment for the following Tuesday. That was how she came to be sitting in the waiting room, while Brianna scrolled through her phone. 40 minutes after her 9 o'clock appointment, a man came out to greet her. Not Mr. Pelletier. A younger man. Late 30s, maybe 40, in a suit that fit him well and a manner that did not. He introduced himself as Evan Shaughnessy, a junior associate, and told her that unfortunately Mr. Pelletier had been pulled into something urgent and had asked Evan to conduct the preliminary meeting. Nadine looked at him for a moment. Just a moment. The preliminary meeting, she repeated. To go over the basics of the situation. Get everyone on the same page. She had been in the industry long enough to know what this was. They had looked at the file. Ya Okafor, Dartmouth, modest house, modest accounts, and they had looked at the name of the person contesting the claim, and they had sent a junior associate, because the preliminary meeting, in their estimation, didn't require anything more than that. Of course, she said, and she followed him to a small meeting room off the main corridor. Evan Shaughnessy sat across from her, with a thin folder, and the air of someone who is prepared just enough to seem prepared. He explained the Drummond claim. He used words like complex and unfortunately, and you have to understand the legal landscape here. He told her that a signed purchase agreement was a significant instrument. He told her it would be difficult, not impossible, but difficult, to challenge. He did not ask her a single question. Nadine let him finish. She unzipped her leather portfolio, took out a document, and laid it on the table in front of him. That's a copy of my sister's bank records from the 14 months preceding her death, she said. Specifically her checking account. Can you tell me where the deposit is? Evan looked down at the page. If Ya Okafor had agreed to sell that house, Nadine said, there would have been a deposit. Standard purchase agreements in Nova Scotia require a deposit to be paid within 24 hours of signing. I've looked at every transaction in this account for 14 months. There is no deposit from Fletcher Drummond or any entity associated with him. She took out a second document. That's a report from a handwriting analyst I retained 2 weeks ago. She's compared the signature on the purchase agreement to 12 authenticated samples of my sister's handwriting. Letters, checks, medical forms. Her conclusion is in the summary on page 2. Evan flipped to page 2. And that, Nadine said, reaching into the portfolio again, is a statement from the contractor who completed a bathroom renovation at the Dartmouth property in November of last year. Work commenced 4 months after the date on that purchase agreement. The contractor spoke to my sister directly on 6 separate occasions during the project. He has provided a sworn statement that she spoke with enthusiasm about spending another 20 years in that house. She closed the portfolio. "I would like to meet with Mr. Pelletier," she said, "today." Even Shaughnessy looked up from the documents. He looked like a man who had walked into a room expecting to explain a spreadsheet and found himself in the middle of an audit. "I'll see if he's available," he said. "Please do." He was gone for 11 minutes, Nadine counted. Mr. Pelletier was a man in his late 50s, with silver hair, and the particular posture of someone who had been taken seriously for so long he'd stopped thinking about it. He came into the meeting room ahead of Evan, shook Nadine's hand with 2 of his, and sat down like he was settling in for a conversation he should have been having from the start. "Mrs. Okafor," he said, "I apologize for the delay. I understand you've brought some compelling documentation." "I've brought the beginning of it," Nadine said. "I have more." He looked at her with an expression she'd seen before. It was the expression people had when they recalibrated. When they looked at someone and understood that the version of them they'd constructed in their mind was not the one sitting across the table. "Tell me," he said. So she did. She had spent 6 weeks building the case against Fletcher Drummond's claim the same way her father had once built a folder for a bank manager who needed convincing. She had been methodical. She had been thorough. She had not wasted a single evening or weekend since the letter from Drummond's lawyers had arrived. She had pulled the title history on the Dartmouth property and found that Drummond had made inquiries about it 3 years earlier through a different brokerage, before Yah had owned it outright. She had contacted 2 former tenants of properties Drummond managed in Halifax and Cape Breton, both of whom had similar stories, purchase agreements that appeared after deaths, elderly owners who had no memory of signing anything. One case had been settled quietly. The other was still in dispute. She had spoken to a retired detective in Nova Scotia who had heard Drummond's name before. She had kept every email, every phone call log, every document request, and every response or non-response in a binder that was now sitting in the trunk of her car. She had also, 3 days after receiving Drummond's claim, quietly engaged one of the most well-regarded estate litigation firms in Halifax. She had not mentioned any of this to Hargrove and Pelletier because she had not yet decided whether Hargrove and Pelletier were competent, conflicted, or simply careless. She wanted to see how they handled the meeting first. By the time she finished speaking, Mr. Pelletier had stopped writing notes and was just listening. "You retained Halifax counsel already," he said, 3 weeks ago. A pause. "And you're telling us all of this now, because I wanted to understand who I was working with," Nadine said. "This estate is not complicated. My sister had a clear will. The claim against it is fraudulent. I have evidence of that, and I have evidence that Mr. Drummond has done this before. What I needed to know was whether the people managing this file would take it seriously." She looked at him directly. Sending a junior associate to a preliminary meeting about a disputed estate does not inspire confidence, Mr. Pelletier. He had the decency to look uncomfortable. "You're right. That was an error in judgment on our part." "Yes, it was." He sat with that for a moment. Then he said, "What would you like from us going forward?" "I want this firm to coordinate fully with my Halifax counsel. I want everything shared. I want Drummond's claim challenged through every available instrument. And I want this resolved before the summer, because my sister's house is sitting empty in Dartmouth, and it deserves better than to be tied up in someone else's scheme for another year." "Understood," Mr. Pelletier said. He said it like he meant it. Nadine would wait to see if he did. "Now, if you're watching this and you've ever been walked past, looked through, handed off to someone junior when you deserve the full table, leave a comment. Because what Nadine did next is what happens when someone has done everything right and then has to prove it on top of that, and it is worth paying attention to." The challenge to Drummond's claim was filed in the 2nd week of May. The Halifax firm, Asante and Reeve, a two-partner boutique that had been quietly winning estate disputes in Atlantic Canada for 15 years, led the filing. Hargrove and Pelletier provided full coordination, as promised. Pelletier himself had called 3 times in the intervening weeks, more attentive than Nadine had expected, and she'd decided that made him the kind of man who needed to be shown, rather than told. Drummond's lawyers pushed back immediately. They called the handwriting analysis insufficient, the bank records circumstantial, the contractor's statement inadmissible on procedural grounds. They were confident, which told Nadine that Drummond had done this before and it had worked before, and that he had not yet understood what kind of person he was dealing with. The retired detective Nadine had spoken to in Nova Scotia, a man named George Wentworth, 40 years in the RCMP, now doing private consultation work, had agreed to provide a formal statement about a prior case he'd been aware of involving Drummond. He was retired and meticulous, and had kept his own records. The second complainant in Cape Breton, whose mother's property had been the subject of a similar claim 4 years earlier, agreed to testify. Her name was Sandra Ninkemderim, and her mother had died before the dispute was resolved. Sandra had been fighting it alone, through a legal aid lawyer who was doing his best with limited resources. Nadine had, quietly, arranged for Asante and Reeve to take on Sandra's case at no cost. It was not a gesture, it was strategy. 2 complainants are a dispute. 3 connected cases with a consistent pattern are something else entirely. The Nova Scotia RCMP opened a file. The morning the case broke open was a Thursday in late June. Nadine was in her condo in Scarborough, at her kitchen table with coffee and a document she'd been reviewing when her phone rang. It was the lead partner at Asante and Reeve, a woman named Abina, who had gone quiet and precise in the way that meant the news was significant. Fletcher Drummond had withdrawn his claim, not negotiated, not sought a settlement, withdrawn it entirely. The RCMP contacted his legal team yesterday, Abina said. I don't know exactly what was communicated, but the withdrawal came in this morning. Nadine set her mug down. The house, she asked. Clear. No encumbrances. It's yours, or rather the estate's, completely. She sat for a moment. Outside her window, a streetcar went by on Kingston Road, its bell faint through the glass. Across the street, a man was walking a very old dog. Slowly, the way you walk with someone when you know the walks are numbered. All right, Nadine said. Thank you, Abina. She hung up and sat with it for another minute. Then she picked up her phone again and called her brother in Brampton, and then her nephew in Montreal. And then she called the contractor in Dartmouth, a kind man named Terence, who had gone out of his way to write the most precise and damning bathroom renovation statement in the history of Nova Scotia. And she told him the house was safe. He said, Good. Your sister deserved better than that. She did, Nadine said. She really did. Fletcher Drummond was charged with fraud and forgery 11 weeks later. The charge sheet named 3 properties and 4 complainants, including Okafor's estate, Sandra Nkemderim's mother's property, and 2 others that investigators had identified through the paper trail Nadine had helped them see. His real estate license was suspended pending the outcome. His firm, which had been operating under 2 different names in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, went quiet. Nadine drove to Dartmouth in August. She took her time, she had the time, and stopped in Amherst, where she ate a bowl of chowder at a place her sister had mentioned once, and she looked out at the parking lot and thought about all the drives Ya had taken on that same highway, back and forth between a life she had built herself, quietly, without asking for anything from anyone. The house was exactly as she'd left it. The contractor had arranged for a neighbor to water the plants, and most of them had made it. The kitchen still smelled faintly like her sister, which Nadine had not expected, and which stopped her in the doorway for a moment. She walked through every room. She sat in the chair by the window where Ya had apparently done most of her reading. You could tell by the stack of novels on the side table and the dent in the cushion. She looked at the bathroom renovation, which was, objectively, a very good bathroom. Subway tile, a deep soaker tub. Ya had wanted the soaker tub for years. She sat in the chair by the window for a long time. She didn't cry. She had already done a lot of that, in the weeks after the funeral, in the private hours that grief requires. What she felt now was something harder to name. A kind of righteous exhaustion. The weight of having had to fight for something that should never have been in question. The fatigue of proving, again, that what belongs to you in a country where that proof is demanded from some people and taken for granted by others. She'd won. She'd known she would win, because she'd been careful and thorough and strategic. And her sister had been an honest woman who had owned her home and written a clear will. But winning had taken 6 months, and a handwriting analyst, and a Halifax law firm, and a retired Mountie, and a coordinated fraud investigation. And it had started with a receptionist who hadn't said hello. She thought about Brianna. She didn't have anger toward her specifically. She was young, and she'd been trained by the environment she was in. And Nadine had been that age once and knew how long it took to understand what you were participating in when you participated in certain assumptions. But she thought about the moment. The 2 minutes at the front desk. The phone that got picked up. She thought about all the people who would have been broken by that, who would have walked out, or deferred, or believed the junior associate when he said it would be difficult. People who didn't have 30 years of accounting behind them, or a father who'd taught them to build a folder, or the capacity to retain a Halifax firm and coordinate a case across 2 provinces. What happened to them? It was a question she couldn't answer. But she could hold it. Ya's house sold in October. Not to Fletcher Drummond. Not to any investor. Nadine had put it on the market with a local agent in Dartmouth. A woman who had cried when Nadine explained the situation, and then pulled herself together and said she would personally make sure it went to the right buyer. It went to a young nurse, 29 years old, who had just finished her first year at the QEII and was looking for something she could put her own mark on. She told the agent, been saving for years. Nadine thought Ya would have appreciated that. The nursing scholarship at Dalhousie received its bequest. The 3 friends got what they were supposed to get. The plants that hadn't survived went to the compost, and the ones that had gone to 3 different homes, which felt right. The estate was settled. Everything was done. On the drive back to Ontario, somewhere past Moncton, with the sun going sideways through the driver's window, and the highway long and flat ahead of her, Nadine thought about her father's folder, about the bank manager who had needed to see numbers before he would believe them, about every room she had ever walked into and understood, within seconds, that she would have to prove herself before they let her speak. She had kept proving herself. She would probably keep proving herself, because that was the reality, and she had made her peace with it a long time ago. The way you make peace with a weight you've learned to carry so well it's become part of your posture. But she had also built a life, quietly, that no one could take from her. And when someone had tried, when someone had looked at her sister's name on a death notice and thought easy, she had been ready. Her father had taught her that. The folder, the receipts, the records, the patience to let the numbers speak when the room wouldn't. She pressed play on the audiobook she'd queued up for the drive, something Ya had recommended to her 3 years ago that she was only getting to now, and she drove west through New Brunswick as the light turned gold. The highway went on. The sun kept moving, and the house, somewhere behind her, was in the hands of a young nurse who was probably already planning what color to paint the walls. That was enough. That was more than enough.